Welcome to Parental Alienation and Narcissism by J. Claude McDaniel. This program is to help you heal and navigate through the hardships associated with narcissistic alienation. Please like and subscribe.
Welcome to Video 12. My name is J. Claude McDaniel, author and victim of alienation. I share my experiences, education, and provide valuable information that I hope will help you navigate through your plight. In this episode, I take you from the smear campaign in Part A to surviving character assassination in Part B. Part A, the smear campaign and its use of flying monkeys. When most people think about parental alienation, they picture conflict between two parents. Arguments, custody disputes, missed visitations. But Alex eventually discovered that the battlefield was much larger than he imagined. The real war wasn't only being fought inside the family. It was being fought in schools, doctors' offices, churches, neighborhood gatherings, social circles, and family events. The most dangerous attacks weren't happening in front of him. They were happening behind closed doors, out of sight, out of earshot, and often without his knowledge. One of the most effective weapons in a narcissist's arsenal is secrecy. Not direct confrontation. Not public accusations. Secrecy. Because when people hear only one side of a story, they often assume they're hearing the truth. Alex didn't realize this at first. He simply noticed subtle changes. Teachers seemed less welcoming. Friends became distant. Relatives acted differently around him. Conversations felt awkward. Something had changed. But nobody would tell him what. Over time he discovered why. A quiet narrative was being built behind the scenes. Unlike a traditional smear campaign, covert defamation rarely involves dramatic accusations. Instead, it works through implication, suggestion, half-truths, carefully planted doubts. The goal isn't necessarily to prove that you're a bad parent. The goal is to make people wonder if you might be. And once doubt is planted, it tends to grow on its own. Alex learned that many of these tactics were almost invisible. A birthday card that never arrived. A message that somehow wasn't delivered. An invitation that disappeared. A school notice that never reached him. To outsiders, it appeared that Alex wasn't making an effort, that he had forgotten important events, that he wasn't involved. The reality was very different. But reality often loses ground when perception is being carefully managed. Then came the influence over institutions, teachers, counselors, medical professionals, faith leaders, people who should have remained neutral. Sometimes they were told Alex wasn't involved. Sometimes they were told he lacked parental rights. Sometimes they were led to believe he simply didn't care. The statements weren't always dramatic, but they were effective. Because once authority figures adopt a certain perception, every future interaction tends to be filtered through it. The most painful discovery was realizing that many of the people participating in the process weren't malicious. They were deceived. They genuinely believed they were helping, protecting, supporting. These individuals became what many survivors refer to as flying monkeys. Not because they were evil, but because they had been recruited into a narrative they never questioned. And the more people who repeated the story, the more credible it appeared. One conversation became 10. 10 became 50. Eventually, the narrative developed a life of its own. Alex wasn't just fighting one person's opinion anymore. He was fighting an entire network of assumptions. A social echo chamber that repeated the same story until it sounded like fact. The most effective smear campaigns don't rely on evidence. They rely on repetition. And repetition can be extraordinarily powerful. By the time Alex understood what was happening, the damage had already spread. Not because people hated him, but because they had been given a version of reality that they believed was true. And that realization taught him something important. The smear campaign wasn't random. It was strategic. It wasn't emotional. It was calculated. And understanding the strategy was the first step toward surviving it. In the next part B of this story, we'll explore the surviving character assassination by elaborate subliminal smearing. Part B, surviving the smearing and character assassination. By the time Alex realized the smear campaign was underway, he found himself fighting battles he never knew existed. The challenge wasn't simply maintaining a relationship with his children. The challenge was preserving his identity, his credibility, his reputation as a father. And perhaps most importantly, his ability to remain present in his children's lives. The consequences of covert defamation can be devastating. Information begins disappearing. School updates never arrive. Medical information becomes difficult to obtain. Important decisions happen without your knowledge. And suddenly, you find yourself treated like an outsider in the life of your own children. For Alex, the most painful part wasn't always the exclusion. It was the confusion. The feeling that people had already formed opinions about him before he ever walked into the room. A teacher who seemed unusually distant. A counselor who appeared suspicious. A community member who suddenly became cold. It felt as though a conversation had taken place without him. Because it had. The narrative had already been written. And Alex was expected to live inside it. What made the situation even more difficult was that many of the accusations were impossible to disprove. How do you defend yourself against a rumor? How do you correct a false impression? How do you challenge something that was never said publicly? These are the questions targeted parents face every day. The emotional cost is enormous. Every misunderstanding requires explanation. Every missing piece of information requires effort. Every relationship becomes another bridge that must be rebuilt. And while you're trying to protect your connection with your children, you're also forced to defend your credibility to people who should have remained neutral. Many parents spend years fighting these battles. Some spend fortunes on legal fees. Others exhaust themselves trying to correct misinformation. Yet Alex eventually discovered something important. Fighting fire with fire rarely works. Launching a counter-smear campaign only creates more conflict. Retaliation often reinforces the very narrative the alienator wants others to believe. So, Alex adopted a different strategy. Documentation. Patience. Consistency. He kept records. Saved emails. Maintained timelines. Preserved facts. Not because he wanted revenge, but because facts become invaluable when narratives begin replacing reality. He also learned the importance of professionalism. Every interaction mattered. Every conversation mattered. Every email mattered. Because credibility isn't built through arguments. It's built through consistency. The more calm, reasonable, and factual Alex became, the harder it was for misinformation to survive scrutiny. And over time, some people began noticing inconsistencies. Questions emerged. Stories stopped adding up. The truth didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived slowly. One realization at a time. One contradiction at a time. One conversation at a time. That's one of the greatest weaknesses of any smear campaign. It depends on secrecy. It depends on people never comparing notes. It depends on assumptions remaining unchallenged. But truth has a remarkable ability to surface, especially when someone remains committed to it. The lesson Alex learned was simple but powerful. The narcissist's greatest weapon is secrecy. But your greatest defense is persistence. Persistence in telling the truth. Persistence in documenting reality. Persistence in showing up. Persistence in remaining the parent your children need, even when others are trying to erase your role. Because character assassination may damage a reputation, but it cannot erase the truth. And while the process can be painfully slow, truth has a way of outlasting even the most carefully constructed lies. As this story continues, we'll explore one of the most powerful tools available to targeted parents: preserving evidence, documenting patterns, and creating a record of reality that can withstand attempts to rewrite history. Because when memory is manipulated and narratives are distorted, facts become more than information. They become protection. This ends episode 12 of my videos. Part 13 will be speaking to the retaining of flying monkeys, how they are recruited and groomed to total secrecy. Thank you for reviewing my site and listening to this episode. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It helps this valuable site to grow and spread sound educational information. Sincere thanks, J. Claude McDaniel.